Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 17th of February 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we are joined by David Scott with Northern Exposure and also by David Ellis from Strategic Defence Initiatives. Some really astonishing things beginning to unfold. Clearly, politics is speeding up. But before we start, I'll just say that apparently there's some diluted sunshine in Shropshire, so I'm not sure what that means.
Good. Well,
there we go.
There we go. Now, we warned you it was going to happen. We warned you last September, in fact, that Tony Blair was claiming to be the insurgent now. Last September, he said he was going to close his commercial enterprises and focus on not-for-profit activities. In other words, he was going to do things pro bono. He said at the time he had told his staff in Grosvenor Square, I want to concentrate the vast bulk of my time on not-for-profit work that we do. De facto, this has been the case in the past 2 years, but we need to reflect the change in the way we are structured. So he shut down various bits and pieces, Tony Blair's associates and so on. And of course, in October, then he waded into the Brexit argument. Well, today, he's telling us we've all got to rise up. We've got to rise up in defence of what we believe. Of course, he's talking about the Remain camp there. And he's saying that, people didn't have the knowledge of the true terms of Brexit, that we've got to...
We were ignorant.
We were ignorant, yes,
yeah.
That Brexit, instead of discussing what type of Brexit we're going to have, we're just going straight for leaving. And of course, this is all part of the fraud, in my opinion, because, what's he there to do? Just to stir things up and keep people distracted. Brexit at any cost is what he was worried about. Our challenge, he said, is to expose relentlessly the actual cost, to show how this decision was based on imperfect knowledge, which will now become informed knowledge. So Tony Blair is going to inform us. This probably the first time in his entire life that he has informed anybody of anything that wasn't a lie. But of course, it will be a lie, because that's what he's done all his life.
At least he's consistent.
Yep.
Well, perhaps before we bring in David Ellis, let's just run from Tony Blair. Probably literally would be appropriate, but let's follow through this, because David Ellis, flagging up on his Twitter account, the EU Subcommittee C, Foreign Affairs, Defence and Development Policy, May 2005 to 2006. And what we're starting to get glimpses here is how this Brexit lie runs, in that the public is told we're coming out, but behind the scenes it's clear that everything has been fully integrated. So I'm going to hand over to David in just a minute, but to show how this works out, here is the little nest of these EU committees. So we've got one main committee, and under it 6 subcommittees: financial affairs, energy, external affairs, internal market, home affairs, etc. Justice as well. But trust us, they say. We are all...
Right, but just to clarify, these are UK government or UK Parliament committees which are discussing EU issues, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you had to ask me that, Mike, because, of course, it proves the point. You're not too sure whether you're actually looking at the EU at work or something to do with our Parliament. But this is actually our Parliament, even though the website pictures are full of European flags and European banknotes. So if you sort of follow this thing through, here's one of the EU financial affair, one of the committees, financial affairs. It's all big business, this one, of course. And we were interested in this gentleman here because he's being interviewed as a witness about what Britain should be doing with regard to the EU. So this seems highly appropriate. So he's a Frenchman. He's chief executive of the London Stock Exchange Group. His history is banks. Goldman Sachs, Credit Suisse, Dresdner, Lehman. He's been involved with the Treasury. He's been part of Cameron's personal team on finance. He's been involved with the Bank of England, etc., etc. He's got UK top company. He's worked in helping to set that up, which has got HQs in London and Frankfurt. Apologies for that additional text in there. And he is dripping in wealth, and we really mean dripping in wealth. Have a look at the Business Insider here, which is saying, well, there was going to be possibly a takeover that could make him a cool 16 million. He earns, I think it's 6 million a year. He's French. He's working with German companies, but he's brought in as an independent witness for the UK committees. And we can go on to this sort of area, the EU budget inquiry. This one was quite interesting. Here's evidence that they've taken. And I just noticed that here we'd actually taken notice from two experts from Matrix Chambers. Well, of course, Sherry Blair, intimately involved with Matrix, but she moved on to her own startup company, Omnia, which is advising governments. So we've got the same old people going around in the same circuit, advising the government to do as they wish. David, over to you, because what is it you were pulling out of this little nest of vipers?
What's happening is that the people via their would-be Parliament and their would-be MPs is being absolutely made a mockery of. Parliament isn't working, the MPs are not working properly. They have been completely usurped. They have been outmanoeuvred, outgunned, out everything. They've been locked out of their own system, locked out of their own due process. They've effectively made themselves all redundant because they are just being run rings around by what's going on here with this. So it doesn't matter whether they're for, against, or whatever. They're completely and utterly moribund in their office. So, whether they do want to speak or, I've got the beguile to go against, whether CCHQ tell them to, say something or not say something. What we can see here is that in these committees, which are completely run by the EU, they have been we've been nobbled. Absolutely nobbled.
So this is total politicisation, effectively, of what used to be the civil service. The civil service used to be doing a pretty good job taking, in a very simplistic sense, debate from Westminster, and then that was all part of putting it into action for the benefit of the public. Now we have simply got this corporate, highly politicised group of people making decisions to their entire satisfaction.
Correct. Yeah. When I met Admiral Lord Boyce last year, former First Sea Lord and Knight of the Garter, he stated to me that Brexit made no difference. Now, he's correct. He's absolutely correct in this because the stitch-up has already taken place. So the charade of this Brexit that May is talking about is a nonsense because the trade deal, the real trade deal, is EU military union and our nuclear weapons and the submarines, which clearly the Germans require. And they require it in lock, stock and barrel, both the Crown and Her Majesty's barrels, all in one go. This is everything. This is a massive monster. And this is what we've all got to start talking about because the committees, and I've just got off the phone this morning with a gentleman who's investigating what's going on with Alan Duncan and the EU Affairs Committee and so on, with Bill Cash, and it has been utterly nobbled.
Okay, well, where do we go from there?
Well, a slight pause and silence. It's becoming so obvious. It's a question of how do we get this news across to people. There is no Brexit. Theresa May utterly lying to the nation. We're now starting to lift the lid on how this mechanism behind the scenes actually works.
Amazing number of high-level meetings going on at the moment. We've had the NATO defence ministers meeting this week. We have the G20 ministers meeting. We'll talk about that in a minute. But first of all, the Munich Security Conference. Now, of course, this is an annual conference. Some people describe it as geopolitical theatre. In this year, we've got 30 heads of state, more than 30 heads of state coming. Not Putin or Trump, of course. They're sending subordinates. 80 foreign and defence ministers participating. This is the 53rd annual Munich Security Conference. And among this year's participants are the UN Secretary General, of course, EU High Representative, i.e. Foreign Minister Federica Mogherini, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, Angela Merkel will be there, Mike Pence will be there, James Mattis will be there, and so it goes on. Bill Gates will be there and Bono will be there.
Oh, that's good.
Yes, so that's good.
Remind me what he is. He's a pop star. Can he play an instrument at all? Sings,
yeah. Sergei Lavrov will be there, and they're concerned that this is the most volatile environment at any point since World War II. So, just to give an impression of what these guys are worried about, let's just look at a quick video.
post-truth, post-West, and post-order. What does it mean? Post-truth means we are dealing with a new level of fake news, of hybrid warfare, of using the digital world to disseminate information that is nothing but propaganda. Propaganda is not a new instrument in world politics, but the means by which it is disseminated today is of course much more effective. Today, through social media, you can reach millions, many millions in a second with true or not so true information. So that's a new challenge for world peace, for stability, and for cooperation in the international system. The second item is post-West. Are we entering an era of illiberalism where authoritarian governments are going to replace more and more traditional Western value-based democracies? Question mark. I think it is right for us to be concerned about this crisis, this decline of the West, the disappearance of the classic leadership nation of the West, the United States. And all of this together, post-truth and post-West, of course raises important questions about the international order in general. Is global governance coming apart at the seams? Do our international institutions work as they should be working? Look at the United Nations, look at NATO, look at the OSCE, which is desperately trying to help resolve the Ukraine conflict. Many questions regarding the stability of global governance, about the validity and the strength of the international system of global order. So these three items actually form the intellectual background against which we've developed this year's Munich Security Report.
So that's what they're going to be talking about. That's what they're concerned about. Post-truth, post-West, post-order. David Scott, what do you make of that?
Well, the first thing that comes out of it is they do not have a clue what's happening. They don't have any language to describe it. The election of Trump, Brexit, the whole movement in and reaction towards what they've been doing, what they've been selling and forcing on people, has really taken them by surprise. This is not a man who actually understands what's going on. The issue of he talks about the risk of illiberalism. They've made the words to mean the opposite of what they used to mean. Liberalism used to mean government leaves you alone. The reaction that we're seeing in the people across the world now is a reaction against governments who will do anything but leave you alone, from named person in Scotland right the way across to Trump's action against regulation in America, so that people's jobs are not taken away by politically motivated regulation such as the campaign against coal. All of this is a reaction against authoritarian government. So what they regard, what they say is liberal is not, it's authoritarianism. Everything is reversed, black is white. Very interesting little video.
Yes. Any thoughts?
Well, we're back on the subject of language, which we've mentioned over several days, and I think we're going to increasingly be focusing on language because, of course, one of the ways that those individuals driving for world government, one of the ways they've been attacking us is to use language in either an inappropriate way or a way which is totally deceptive, and we need to highlight that.
Yep. Okay. So also taking place is the G20 ministers meeting, 19 countries plus the European Union. So we've got, Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, France, so it goes on, Britain, the United States. Foreign policy is and must be more than crisis management, that's according to the German Vice Chancellor and Foreign Minister, Sigmar Gabriel. Here he is. He said terrorism, water scarcity, forced migration, humanitarian emergencies cannot be resolved by isolation. Climate change cannot be tackled by barbed wire. I think that was a little barbed jibe at Donald Trump there. suspects are meeting. Tillerson is going to be at it. Boris is going to be at it. Well, they were at it yesterday. They met yesterday. And Boris said it was really good because he got to talk about NATO, about Russia, about Ukraine, Syria, Yemen, Iran, and cyber. So he had a fantastic meeting. And but here was the interesting meeting, of course, which was between Sergei Lavrov and Tillerson. And what was particularly interesting about this was the press and what happened to the press. So RT reporting the journalists being asked to leave as Tillerson began addressing or speaking to Lavrov. So basically, he had said to Lavrov had said to Mr. Secretary of State, "I thank you for this opportunity to have first contact after you've assumed office, and I would like to congratulate you once again for that." And Tillerson had begun his remarks back when his staff basically interrupted the thing and asked the media to leave. And Lavrov saying, "Well, why did you shush them out? I don't really understand what's going on." So this, Brian, it's a staggering situation where an American member of government isn't prepared to have the press in the room while he's having.
Well, I think this comes back to David Scott's point. These people don't know what's going on, so their reaction to what's going on is becoming increasingly disjointed and perverse. They're frightened of the fake media. No. They're apparently frightened of any media here. So this is so easy to see. Well, how is the United Kingdom going to solve the media problem? Well, that is dead easy because the government is now taking total and utter control of the BBC. It's had it really in the past, but now there's no ifs or buts. So here's the appointment of Sir David Clementi as the new head of the BBC board.
The BBC board. You've labelled BBC Trust there, but of course the BBC Trust has been replaced with this new unitary corporate style board.
Well spotted. Yeah. Okay. Well, you can follow this through yourself. I mean, this is the gov.uk part of it. Chairman of the new BBC board, Mike's quite right there. Now, we shouldn't worry because the Commissioner for Public Appointments has overseen this and the whole thing is transparent. Yeah. And I've had a discussion with them today. So the Commissioner himself for Public Appointments, that was all set up with the Cabinet Office. So you understand that's
independent.
That's independent. And then the decision on Sir David Clementi was actually made by the Privy Council. So that's independent of government. Yeah. So let's have a look at the man himself. Here he is. And he's, former bank deputy for the Bank of England. So there you are. I'm chosen and appointed by the government in secret, but he is independent. So government in UK really got no problems with media because they're going to control it utterly.
David, this use of the word independent, how do we define that word these days?
Well, that's very interesting. In Scotland, independence means a socialist utopia. Politically, and when you're talking about people being independent, it's having, I suppose, a cigarette paper between them and the vested interest. That's what qualifies as higher levels of independence. I'd also say the problem with the BBC is, it came to me yesterday, I was thinking about the BBC, as you do, driving along, listening to the lies on the radio, and I realised there's two problems with the BBC. It all comes down to not being able to keep the Ten Commandments, I understand. They have a big problem with the one about adultery. But the two I've got in mind is, thou shalt not steal, well, that would be the licence fee, and thou shalt not bear false witness. And the false witness that they bear is that we are objective and we have no agenda. And that is the big lie.
Yes, indeed. David Ellis, did you want to comment?
I couldn't agree more. Well said, David Scott. That was outstanding. Absolutely outstanding. In a nutshell, home run.
Okay. Well, let's move on then to more fake news because, of course, the media absolutely full of Donald Trump's press conference yesterday. Donald Trump insists presidency is fine-tuned machine after extraordinary 75-minute press conference in which he attacks the press, whines the Telegraph. CNN Politics, an amazing moment in history. Donald Trump's press conference. What have we got here in the New Yorker? Donald Trump's alternative reality press conference. Haaretz saying Trump snaps a Jewish reporter who asks how he will tackle anti-Semitism. So, and the BBC saying Trump launches stinging attack on the media. So they were all going nuts over this. David, what can we say?
I loved it. I thought it was wonderful television. His reaction to the BBC was particularly memorable. And he looked at them with a level of contempt that we all feel, but rarely get to see broadcast live to the entire world. The comment on anti-Semitism, there was a Jewish, Orthodox Jewish reporter stood up and tried to ask a question which implied Trump is racist. Racist is like anti-Semitism. There's been more anti-Semitism since you came into office. What are you going to do about it? And Trump said, basically this is just a ridiculous question. It's a slur in the guise of a question. Sit down and I'll give you an answer, but I'm not going to listen to any more of this. And actually, he was quite right. This is a man with a Jewish son-in-law, Jewish daughter, Jewish grandchildren, and this anti-Semitic slur will not stick to him.
Indeed. Well, if we just bring the BBC's article back up again, because of course we should mention Peter Oborne from the Mail on the Radio 4 Today programme this morning. If you get onto the BBC iPlayer, if you're able to do that, you should listen to it for a few minutes of entertainment. Although he was pushing the sort of Trump is a liar line, at the same time he was accusing the BBC of arrogance, hypocrisy, for being prepared to put up with, for example, and indeed promote Tony Blair's lies. He said that at least Trump is entertaining. Blair didn't have any such excuses. He was saying, he had made it clear. He made clear of his view that the BBC was promoting Blair's lies, and in promoting Blair's lies was partially therefore responsible for Iraq, and then following that up with promoting Cameron's lies and therefore being partly responsible for Libya. And I have to say that Nick Robinson, thankfully no relation, did squirm quite a lot.
But they're not used to this at all. So he made light of it and laughed, and it was all very amusing. But that was his reaction, because what was being said was obviously unsettling him.
Absolutely. So let's stick with fake news for one more example. And this brings up a number of issues that I just want to briefly touch on. Russia send shockwaves to the West as Putin unveils new fighter jet in terrifying clip. So this was a clip that was released by the Ministry of Defense in Russia. And what is in the Express article, they're saying Russia has released footage of an advanced jet fighter capable of traveling at more than twice the speed of sound. The thunderous jet performs a striking demonstration of what the Su-35S is capable of. In the dramatic footage released by the Russian Ministry of Defense, the pilot can be seen jumping into the deadly machine before shooting off into the sky. As it speeds through the air, the pilot twists the jet with chilling maneuvers as it blasts through the air. As the jet touches down, a parachute shoots out to help it slow after reaching speeds of up to 1,500 miles per hour in the sky. And so it goes on. Earlier versions of the jet have been seen in Syria's skies. The jet is fitted with a single 30mm cannon and can carry a payload of 17,630 pounds of missiles, rockets and bombs. It's believed the Kremlin want foreign governments to buy its latest jets. It is utter dross and nonsense. So, had a look at who the writer of this, who the journalist is. It was a young lad called Darren Hunt. Now, I'm not going to give Darren too much of a hard time.
A little bit of a hard time we're going to give him, because he needs to grow up.
Yes, well, he's only a few months out of university. He has no experience whatsoever. This is what it says on his LinkedIn page. I'm currently a reporter for the Express video news team. Here, my main tasks include researching stories, writing up news stories with a video element and publishing them using a CMS. I build stories to be subbed, and so it goes on. But the key point here is a young lad with no experience. He is required to write 25 stories a week. That's 25 stories. That's 5 stories per day. And David Scott, there is no possibility of anybody, even if they have some experience behind them, being able to write 5 articles a day and put any effort into research or identifying proper sources or any of that. So is it any wonder that we're in this ridiculous situation of the collapse of the mainstream media and the dross that they're putting out?
Well, no wonder at all. Yeah, that's just typing. That's not being a journalist. That's just producing words. The, the lack of confidence that people now have in the mainstream media is quite profound, and the mainstream media really don't get it. The reason I was reflecting on the nature of the BBC was an article on the lunchtime programme on BBC Radio Scotland. They were talking to an American actor who had picked up some Scottish slang directed at Trump and thought it was very funny and was circulating this round the metrosexual left of American politics. And they were congratulating each other about how well they were resisting Trump and how much damage to him programs like Saturday Night Live was causing, and the press were causing, without realizing that they've lost their audience. The audience is now laughing at them. The audience has realized what they are and just isn't listening anymore. And these people just haven't got it. They haven't got the memo.
Yeah.
I've just got to say, I did love the headline, though, that these wicked Russians have created a jet that goes twice as fast as the speed of sound. So that's a pretty potent weapon. But is the real problem that this aircraft is actually flying and performing its mission, whereas we've got the disaster at the moment of the F-35, and of course we've also seen that Britain's procurement is totally wrecked. David, we're going to move on to the subject, to the clampdown on the British military, but I smile as I watch this drivel pumped out. This is a pathetic piece of propaganda supposedly attacking the Russians. It's making us look like idiots.
It is totally making us nationally look like idiots. I mean, these people are doing, if Putin is and Russia is such a terrible thing, they're doing the work for him. He doesn't need to do anything. He doesn't need to spend a penny. He doesn't need to do a stroke, because these guys and the rest of the moribund people that are sitting in Parliament are doing all the dirty work. Because this is an utter nonsense where this is concerned with this plane. Because they had something in the 80s called the Foxbat that did Mach 2.
Yeah,
equal capability, which is why we ended up with this thing called EFA, the European Fighter, or the Typhoon. Which was 25 years, 30 years obsolete before it even got out of the hangar, so it's a complete load of nonsense. I mean, really what we're talking about here is why, okay, and it's not as if we haven't tried here at Strategic Defence Initiatives UK, why won't the Express take articles from us on actually what's going on with the nuclear trade deal and the EU requiring full EU military union? Why won't the Express take that from us? We're talking about something here which is a 30, 40-year-old Russian, that have had long-standing capability with aircraft of this nature. This is not news. This just is not news. Yeah. The real news is something they're denying the people.
Well, they won't take information from us, because if you're running fake news and propaganda, the truth just mucks it all up. Let's move on to your key point today, which is just astonishing. We've got on screen a snapshot from David's Twitter page. I'm just going to take your bottom left at the moment. We've got a lady, Hilary Meredith, and she's saying, she's making comment on the Iraq Historic Allegations team, IHAT. This thing is a scam. Our comment here is that it was created to attack and destabilise and demoralise both former and serving servicemen and women. So it was not designed to address abuses, some of which clearly did occur in the field. That's not what IHAT's doing. What IHAT is doing is attacking the servicemen and women. And then another tweet she's put out top left is about mods setting up their own court system with no access to lawyers or appeal. And we're saying here that the mod is terrified of the reality of continuing EU military integration being exposed. So they are really going for a clampdown on the armed forces. But on the right-hand side, we've highlighted, this lady's also tweeted out that I may have mislabeled that. Oh no, the NHS is there. Sorry, it says that if the MOD is an employer and can opt out of our common law system, will the NHS follow suit? Well, I've added there that the NHS has already opted out of common law, because we're getting reports in weekly about how law is being ignored as the NHS covers up its crimes internally. But David, take us just through what the implications are here for the Ministry of Defence, because this is dictatorship on steroids.
Yeah, my take on this is that currently we're in a state of absolute no man's land. And we've been put into, the military, all the people serving, all the troops, airmen, sailors, and so on and so forth, are actually at the moment in a state of flux, and they don't know it. The nation doesn't know it either. What's happened here is that over a period now for quite some time, this key objective of EU military union has raced through without any challenging, without any airing. And what we've got now in the situation is that effectively Her Majesty's government has just issued divorce papers to everybody serving in the military. So currently what they are at the moment is they're in transition to serving the EU. They just don't know it yet. And we're going to get rid of common law and have EU law. So at the moment, what we've got is all those people, those 80-odd thousand that are left in the military, all right, they're in transition to serving the EU. They no longer, in effect, serve the Crown. So I'm going to come back to something now and say that, what we've got here is essentially the same kind of magnitude of we're divorcing our own military to marry anew into EU military union, and the poor people that are in there at the moment just don't realise it, and neither does the nation. So this is the most repugnant thing that's taking place, because they've literally, I'm going to take the words from Goldberg, who's the QC who's representing Dear Sergeant Blackman, is that basically, as a serving person now, you dare not fire or discharge your weapon at anyone for fear you will be charged with murder. So we've got our own military now is basically been made redundant by our government. They are in a state of flux and a state of no man's land. So it's a crisis. This is a crisis event, and this is why the controlling faction within the Tory party will not talk about this. They dare not, because for fear of what the general public will say about it.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, let's move on back to the subject of the Vax documentary and Andrew Wakefield. So the Times added again today, web giants profit from anti-vaccine frauds video. So again, the slur. This is Oliver Moody at his work again. Now, it's interesting that the Times is pushing so hard on this. In this article, they're pointing out that you can get access to the film in the UK from Amazon and iTunes. And from Vimeo, and so they're suggesting that web giants, as they describe it, are profiting from pushing this, as they describe it, fraud, which, fairly contentious position for the Times to take. But a source has told me that the original reason that the Curzon had in Soho had banned the film, because that was the original venue for it to be shown, was following phone calls from the Times. So the Times perhaps has a question to answer here. Is this true that it was harassment? Is how it was described to me, harassment from the Times, which caused the Curzon to back out? I'd like to know that very quickly. And just a reminder to go and, if you want to watch the film, just go to vaxthemovie.com and watch it from there, and use their method of streaming so that they get the best benefit, financial benefit out of it. But David Scott, what's your thoughts on this whole escapade?
We're seeing across the mainstream written print media in Britain a very worrying trend that we have consistent attacks on the freedom of speech coming from the press. If the speech is something that doesn't fit the official narrative, and it's very suffocating, and it's a form of censorship, it's just not official. I'd like my oppression to be much more upfront. I want to have the person with the uniform and the shiny boots kick my door in. Then I know who's oppressing me. This is much more subtly done. You're seeing the Press and Journal, the fifth oldest newspaper in the world, putting out fake news about a local citizen leaked to them by the Crown Office in Scotland. You're seeing the newspaper that was called the Thunderer here now attacking a man who's telling truth to power. Right, that's not the Thunderer. There's a newspaper in the West Highlands called the West Highland Free Press. Its nickname is the Squeak. I think they should swap. I think the Times of London should now be called the Squeak, because it's no longer the Thunderer. And we're seeing this across the board. The Independent is now completely worthless, and we're seeing it in the BBC as well. The mainstream media, in large part, is simply an instrument of suppressing the truth.
Absolutely, and this goes for the scientific community as well. And both there is a shared. Don't want to say a common purpose between the two, but both the scientific and the community and the media are supposed to search for the truth. Neither is doing that anymore. They are chasing money. Scientific community chasing money in the form of grants from vested interests and corporate interests, and lying as a result, effectively. And the same with the media. Where does this end?
It ends in oppression. It ends in bloodshed, I suspect. There's a very important point you make there, Mike, about the scientific community, because it ceased to be scientific some considerable time ago. You've got things like the global warming scam, etc. You've got questions over, for example, the AIDS crisis and how opposing views in that area were suppressed politically and suppressed using funding as a weapon, so that alternative hypotheses were not heard. You've got something that is no longer. I mean, science was always prone to fads and notions and was never the pure pursuit of knowledge it claimed to be. But it's gone a lot dirtier of late as big money has moved in.
Yes, indeed. Okay, well, look, let's move on to TUSLA in Ireland. Now, just for anybody that doesn't know, that's new to the column, tell us what TUSLA is.
TUSLA is a child agency in Ireland. It looks after child protection. It looks after families and family law. We know it in the column. We came across this organisation in the column when we started to look at the Doherty case, because the Dohertys had their children seized twice and now still in the care of the state in Ireland. And both episodes were violent. The second one, there was, I think, 13 people. There was sort of 5 policemen and 8 social workers or something like this. Descended upon this family and violently seized their children. And the agency doing this, there's 2 agencies, Garda Síochána and TUSLA. So we started to look at the links between these two. We started to look at how they were managed and who was managing them. And lo and behold, all those roads led back to Scotland, led back to Aberdeenshire. So we highlighted some of these issues, and we started to get other stories that TUSLA and Garda Síochána were very profoundly corrupt. Now, what's happened in the last couple of weeks is that this corruption has become obvious to the people of Ireland in a way that, sadly, the corruption that surrounds cases like the Doherty case is not obvious to people of Scotland. In Scotland, it's still completely suppressed. There's no news coming out. There's no political questions being asked. But in Ireland, people are now standing up in the Parliament and asking very serious questions. And the case is horrendous. It concerns a Garda officer called McCabe, who 8 years ago discovered seriously criminal wrongdoing by a colleague within the police force, within the Garda, and took the appropriate lawful action and brought that to the authorities' attention and ensured that the criminal activity stopped and the man saw justice. And as a result, Mr. McCabe, Garda McCabe, has gone through, and his family have gone through 8 years of hell. Now, there was an early accusation made against this man that he'd been involved in some sort of inappropriate contact with a child. Now, this accusation came from the daughter of the Garda officer who he brought to justice, and it concerned an alleged incident some decades in the past. This woman was in her 20s and was claiming something happened when she was 6 or 7. It was investigated. The conclusion was that there was no evidence, not only that the incident occurred, but there was considerable doubt that the incident described by the complainant was even a crime. It described this girl being at this officer's house, playing hide and seek, and an allegation that there was something that was a bit off about that. It was extremely minor. The decision was there was nothing to investigate, no prosecution. Case closed. But the case was not closed because later it came back and it transpired that very, very serious allegations of child rape had been levelled against this officer and were in the Tussler files and were then circulated throughout the Garda. So his colleagues were told about this. He wasn't told about it. He didn't know anything of this was being discussed. And he found out about it only very recently, years after these rumours had been circulated. And the official explanation as to why he had been accused of being a child rapist in the official files of Tussler was an administrative error. It was an unfortunate cut and paste exercise that went sadly wrong. So there you go. Tussler can unfortunately cut and paste allegations of child rape into your files and then start to investigate your entire family, because they had files on all of his children. And what's unique about this situation? Only that he was a Garda whistleblower. It's a horrendous situation, and it speaks to exactly the sort of occurrences that we've been reporting on the Doherty case. It's the same sort of approach, it's the same sort of manipulation of the files, but the difference here is it's coming out into the open. I would point out that in the case of Scotland, we know that a Police Scotland officer misrepresented himself to the Dohertys, gave the wrong name, and we believe his name was in fact Sergeant Gibby Buchan. And we know that a report written on the Doherty children, which highlighted concern over another Police Scotland employee, another Police Scotland officer called Alan Lowe, was then modified by Gibby Buchan and sent off to Child Protection Services. And when the modified report got there, it was no longer highlighting concern about Alan Lowe, the police officer. No, now the area of concern was the Doherty family and how they were raising their children and were their children safe. They set the Child Protection Services on the Dohertys with a lie. This is exactly what happened to this whistleblower. Exactly. I was saying that it was an unfortunate cut and paste exercise. No, we're not saying that, because in Scotland we don't get to say any of these things. There's no investigation, there's no questions being asked in Parliament, because we don't have anyone with a spine to do it.
And the Irish Times reporting here that Tussler then were making a formal apology for the McCabe family, and they sent that to the wrong address. Was that just an unfortunate copy and paste mistake?
That was an unfortunate error, yes. Well, you see, the head of Tussler, who is a Scottish chap, they all are Scottish chaps, called Fred McBride, has said that, yeah, mistakes were made. He has admitted that mistakes were made. Here's Fred McBride. He was former director of social work in Aberdeen, so right next to the council where all of the problems affected the Dohertys. And before that, he was doing the same job in Dundee. And during that time, there was a very tragic case of a small boy called Brandon Muir. And if you have a look at that name in Google, you'll find many stories and interviews that show Mr. McBride was perhaps not the right sort of person to be running the child agency in Ireland, but run it he does.
But his predecessor has Scottish connections as well.
And the predecessor was Gordon Jays. Now, Gordon Jays had a very interesting CV. We covered this some months ago. Gordon Jays was head of education in the Stirling area and was responsible for the Dunblane School at the time of the Dunblane massacre. He wasn't particularly well considered by the Cullen inquiry into the Dunblane massacre, who had a couple of things to say about him. They weren't very impressed with him. He then went down to Cambridgeshire and ran the services, the child protection services, children's services in Cambridgeshire, and saw a very marked rise in government intervention into family life. And then he was headhunted to go and do the same in Ireland, and he set up Tussler. It's a relatively new organisation, it's a standalone government agency.
But he didn't last long there.
And no, he only lasted, I think, about just over a year. There was a lot of. We can't prove it was the Doherty case, but there was a lot of criticism and reporting in the Dohertys at one point, and RTE were taking an interest, and then Gordon Jays wasn't in post anymore. So whether that's related, we can't prove it, but we suspect it might be. He was on an extremely high salary. He's now some sort of external consultant, and but replaced by his deputy, Mr. McBride, another Scot, who are bringing the very worst of British Child Protective Services practice to Ireland.
David, you've touched on the Doherty family there in that excellent analysis of what's happening. Could you give our viewers and listeners just a very quick update on where the Dohertys are in their battle? I know there's been some contact last night and this morning.
Yes, we've had a lot more contact. They've managed to get somewhere where they're safe and they're warm. They are in contact with us. We hope to get a lot more information. I think they've been through a fairly rough few months. We'll get the detail of that. There seems to be pretty blatant attempts by Garda Síochána to arrest Brian Doherty and have him sectioned. The only problem is there's nothing wrong with his mental health, and unless he volunteers to be sectioned, there's actually nothing they can do. He's also law-abiding, so arresting them is a bit problematic as well. But the harassment and police involvement seems to go on. So we have Garda Síochána, we have Tussler, we have all the same people engaged in the McCabe scandal and other assaults on other whistleblowers. There's a Garda from Donegal called Harrison, I think it was, who's experienced an almost identical process of harassment. So these very, very corrupt organisations are facing the Dohertys. Now, at the moment, no one in the mainstream is reporting the Doherty case. There are no questions being asked in the Irish Parliament about the Doherty case. But times, they are a-changing, so we'll see what the next few weeks bring.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, we'll end on this one because the government, and Amber Rudd in particular, has announced £40 million package of government measures to protect children and young people from sexual abuse. So this has got to be good news, doesn't it? The Home Secretary yesterday announced that package. It's, where's it going to go? It's going to create a new centre of expertise on child sexual abuse, apparently.
This sounds like the Kingfisher setup in Oxford, where they use the police station that had been involved as failing the young girls coming forward to report abuse. That's where they set up the new headquarters to spearhead leadership in child abuse.
Well, what fascinates me, Brian, is it's a centre of expertise on child sexual abuse. It's not a centre of expertise on child sexual abuse prevention. And so what exactly is it going to be? Is it going to be a school for paedophiles? This is unclear at this point. An extra £20 million for the National Crime Agency to tackle online child sexual exploitation, £2.2 million for organisations to protect children at risk of trafficking, even though they can't even track down children that are missing from care in this country, and the launch of an independent child trafficking advocates. What is that going to be?
Well, that's to undermine the Mackenzie Friends.
Right.
That's what that will be.
Right.
That will be the government to train the people to work with the desperate parents.
Okay, well, here's what Amber Rudd had to say. She said, children should be able to grow up free from the horrors of sexual abuse, exploitation and trafficking. This government has done more than any other to tackle these horrific offences. And she said it with a straight face, I believe. Now, they have in parallel released this, Tackling Child Sexual Exploitation, a progress report. And I just wanted to highlight the things that they're crowing about here. And David, I'll ask you for comment on this in a second. They say, we have tackled the culture of denial within professions about the scale and nature of this crime. Well, that's what they claim, but they certainly haven't tackled the culture of denial within the government itself, within Parliament, as to the complicity of Parliament and the activity of Parliament in this area. We have increased accountability, they say, by strengthening statutory guidance to reduce the risk of children falling through the gaps between services. What that means is they have created a much stronger culture of cover-up, because with people working in multi-agency groups now, they get to know each other. There is no independence. There's no separation of powers. This is a fundamental constitutional issue. And so what they've done by strengthening statutory guidance to stop children to reduce the risk of children falling through the gaps means bigger cover-up. They say we have increased the support available to victims, except if you're victims and survivors of sexual abuse, providing local commissioners with the funding they need to support the particular needs of survivors in their area, as well as holding a central fund so that organisations working nationally with survivors are supported, except when they're not supported, except when they're put in prison instead, because what they're whistleblowing about is involving parliamentarians and others. So that culture of denial that they say that they've dealt with feeds into certain people ending up in prison. And of course, I'm speaking about Melanie Shaw there. And finally, they say they have sharpened the law enforcement response and brought more offenders to justice, including offenders who've been exploiting new methods and technologies to abuse children. In the year to December 2015, 5,879 offenders were convicted of child sexual abuse offences. This was over 1,000 more offenders convicted than in 2014. 51% of those convicted in 2015 were sentenced to immediate custody. None of those people were called Janner. None of those people were called Britain. And none of them were involved in Parliament in any way, shape or form. And so despite the credible evidence from whistleblowers. So this is a pretty staggering thing. David, £40 million. You must be impressed.
Well, I'm impressed with that analysis. That's extremely good. We see this in Scotland because we're the testing ground. We see it with the named person. What does it mean? It means that when the parent goes and tries to confront some sort of wrongdoing, neglect, or other failing of the state, they're now facing an even larger, better organised and more tightly coordinated group of state officials who all are opposing the parent, all are opposing the family. And getting the right thing, getting the truth heard is ever harder. It's very interesting that again, we're seeing references to post-truth society, whereas we're saying, no, what you're calling post-truth is what we call the truth. Right? And we know it when we see it. And more people are waking up to this. We know the truth when we see it.
Okay.
All right, David, thank you very much for that. Also, thank you to David Ellis for your military analysis. We're living in very serious times. We say there's a dictatorship coming into power in the UK. It's being driven through the Conservative Party. A lot of basic Tories need to wake up to what's going on. And of course, as Dave Ellis said, it's obvious that our MPs have not got a clue what is going on around them. And that must include Mr. Gary Streeter, because he does not understand what's happening with defence, or that our local naval base is on the list, is basically on the list for closure. So we'll see what happens in due course. I'd like to say thank you very much to Jenny Wren 55 for the excellent seagull picture. Having spoken about the dangers of seagulls, somebody sent us a wonderful picture of little drawings of seagulls. I had hoped to show it. I emailed it from my phone to my computer, but that took a little bit longer than if it had been a Russian jet flying from A to B. So there we are. Thank you for joining us. If you're not a subscriber, please do. We will be back on Monday. See you then. Bye-bye.